Zago, Dr. Joseph Martin here. Geronimo, spiritual peacemaker warrior. This is one in the series of First Nations spiritual masters presentations for yourself for your benefit. It is not the usual historical account that would be from the people who invaded our territories at Turtle Island, but rather from a more personal perspective from my own relationship with Geronimo, or as he prefers to be called, Goyatle or Goyatle. Goyatle was born in 1829 and he lived for 80 years and passed over into spirit in 1909. He was born in an area of New Mexico to the Chiricahua Apache and spoke Chiricahua. He was a very unusual man in the sense that he did keep himself apart. He was a very small man in a way, and yet had great wisdom and capacity to interpret dreams and see visions. So he became known as a medicine person, as well as turning into a great spiritual warrior. Now, Goyatle was 17 when he married his first wife, and he had a number of children. In a period not too far from then, after his birth, when he was about 22, in 1851, 400 Mexican soldiers marauded his village where he was living with his Apache relatives, and they murdered his mother, some of his siblings, his wife, and all his children. And thereafter, I think this was the turning point, the tipping point for Goyatle to decide that he needed to take care of the elders and the children and all his Apache people, all those who were left. And yes, to a certain degree, this was based on revenge, but also on a deep inner spiritual nature that wanted and needed to be the peacemaker warrior who was there to look after his own people. This is obviously an enduring value system for males in all the First Nations indigenously around the world, but certainly on Turtle Island. And because he was a good military strategist and he knew the ways of the land, and of course because the Apache are able to move through large spaces very quickly without much food or even without water, in fact, over long distances, running either just on foot or certainly on horseback, and knew all the spots where they could hide out. Over the period of his life until much later in his life, he was routinely attacked and followed by all of the Mexican army and also by all the American cavalry, both before the Civil War, during the Civil War, and certainly, most certainly, after the Civil War in America. He never was caught, and he was always able to elude the people who were chasing him and wanting obviously to kill him and all his people, mostly for several reasons, typically in the usual way of wanting to steal and take away all their land and their natural resources and destroy their homes and their culture and language and arts and their traditional spiritual religion, but mostly as it grew historically. In the case of Geronimo, or Goyatle, the American people, not just the American presidents or cavalry, wanted to kill him because they saw him as the greatest outlaw. Of course, in retrospect, in truth and reality, we can say, who are the greatest outlaws when you try to destroy somebody who's just trying to save his people? So he actually outwitted the entire military of the U.S. For decades, for many, many decades. They never did find him. Sometimes with some of the generals he did have a parley, but he never did surrender until circumstances later in his life got so dire with the threats of his people being killed or murdered if he didn't turn himself in. Eventually, much later in his life, he did surrender and turn himself in. He was sent on a railroad to a prison in Florida, mosquito-infested swamp. Many of his people and relatives got sick and died. He did not. It was during this time that he considered his Jesus walk. He was aware that many of the people who call themselves Christians actually did not exhibit the personal solicitude and kindness that Jesus himself has. However, he himself had some personal relationship with Jesus and did go on the Jesus walk. Eventually, he ended up his life in Oklahoma, where he was sent by the government. There is a biography available that was written by a person from Yale University and someone familiar with the Dutch Reformed Church, which he was a part of. But he never did give up his traditional spirituality and his own initial creation as a unique individual, as a First Nations indigenous man. That was kept private, and no matter what historians say about him, the truth is one always holds to one's original spiritual knowledge and wisdom and ways. I'd just like to share a little bit, two things. One story of how he once outwitted the entire American military, who had found him in an area in the southwest of America at night with his family, many of whom were ailing and starving, in fact, and had no food or water and no shelter. And they had camped around him in a circle at nighttime when waiting for dawn so they could just fire upon them all and kill them all, as they had done so many times with so many other First Nations peoples in America in the 19th century. What he did was, from his ability to be one with the elements, he created a fog around the whole encampment, including around the military, and in single file, one at a time, they crawled on their bellies through the fog, through a line in the circle of the military that were surrounding them, and they all escaped, and then they made their way to some other place of safety. Interesting story. So what are we saying here? Goyatle is one of the first original First Nations in the 19th century freedom fighters. And if ever there was a time on earth for all of us in our own way, in a very humble, open, spiritual way, in a sort of, yes, it's, confronting, injustice and so on, but in a way that's non-violent, to create ourselves or recreate ourselves as freedom fighters. We all have our reasons for it, but it all is to create one sisterhood and brotherhood of one nation here on earth. A few simple stories from myself with Goyatle. I've known him since I was a young boy. I've spoken with him endlessly over many days and nights. He's a constant companion and friend of mine. He's in the spirit world. I talk with him all the time. I have done for all my life. In fact, he's co-participated in many of the over 280 sweat lodges, the traditional sweat lodges that we have had here in Canada. So just in finishing then, this is a wonderful story. I would, inspire and encourage you to connect with Goyatle yourselves personally in your own life story of being a freedom fighter for justice, human rights, the environment, and all our good people and all our relations. So until the next time we meet, all my love, all kindness and blessings. May Goyatle be a true friend for you always.